this because we're trying something here that I have never really tried before, and that is my brother wanted to try to do another franchise video with no preparation whatsoever. We came up with the idea to do this video like 10 minutes ago, and we're just going to wing it and see what happens. But we know these movies so well, we're hoping that there's no issue. So, first off, I have talked about Clerks before a long time ago. I think I did it with Empire Records. But within the context of the whole thing here, going all the way to its sequel, obviously we're just doing the Jay and Bob the Askewniverse thing here with, obviously the Clerks animated series is kind of the only thing that's not here in regards to that. So like we're kind of leaving out his other directorial stuff like Jersey Girl and Red State and Tusk and all that, and Yoga Hosers.
What?
Yoga Hosers, you don't know what that is?
Nope.
Oh, okay. I'll actually probably get to it eventually, and then you'll know.
Oh, okay.
Well, let's just say shortly after Zack and Mary, Seth Rogen got Kevin Smith into the whole getting high thing, so Kevin Smith started getting high when he wrote, and obviously his career, the quality of his movies changed pretty drastically. But we'll see how this comes back around when we have the reboot coming before too long. He's been vlogging his whole making of process with that. Where pretty much everybody's going to be coming back, and there'll be a shitload of in-jokes just like there were in Strike Back, so see what happens with that. But as far as how I first came across this series, I believe we came across it and were introduced to it in the same way. And it's something that I still will never quite understand, because the way we were introduced to Jay and Silent Bob and the Askewniverse was we went to the theater with our dad and saw Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back with no context whatsoever. When Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back is one gigantic feature-length in-joke that we never picked up on. We didn't know any of the in-jokes whatsoever. I think mainly it's because we were really young and they were saying fuck a lot, is what appealed to us. And it got dirty from time to time. And there were a lot of familiar faces. Like in the American Pie era, like when Shane Elizabeth or Sean William Scott would pop up and be like, oh, we know those people. Oh, there's Joey Lauren Adams from Big Daddy for 10 seconds. Was she in this series before? We had no idea at the time. Nor Renee Humphreys right with her. So, yeah, Brody doing the whole say, would you like a chocolate-covered pretzel thing? Seems to have no context whatsoever in that scene if you have not seen Mallrats. So, yes, somehow...
We didn't know why Jason Lee was playing two characters.
Yeah. So, yeah, and Ben Affleck playing both Holden McNeil and himself. It's like, how did our heads not explode trying to figure that movie out? Because I don't even remember asking questions. I think we just kind of went with it and just assumed it was being weird for the sake of it. We had no idea these were jokes that pre-existed that were just carrying over to another movie. So then, I think I vaguely heard somewhat that Jay and Silent Bob came from somewhere. So the next development was I saw Dogma on a movie channel. Like the very end of Dogma. And it was like, oh, it's this... It looks kind of serious, but also like an action movie, but there's angels? What in the hell? And then sure enough, Jay and Silent Bob were there. And it was like... Is this a real movie? What the fuck? And then I was like, oh, okay, and they're a series. And then it was your best friend that said, oh yeah, there's a whole series that starts with Clerks, then Mallrats, then Chasing Amy, then Dogma, then Strike Back. And I was like, okay. So we were on a Florida trip, and I decided it was my life's mission to track these movies down on video. It was still the video days, pre-DVD. At least for us, and I decided it was Dogma that I found first, and then I think Mallrats, and then Clerks and Chasing Amy, and then we kind of watched them all, and then it was like, okay, this all makes sense now. Despite how plot-wise they're all incredibly different, tone-wise they can be incredibly different, we do somehow have a full, cohesive universe here that Kevin Smith was able to create. A cinematic universe that features Stan Lee before it was a really, really big deal. So that started with an indie movie that broke out around the same time as like Tarantino and Linklater were coming. And Clerks was right in there, and Kevin Smith was right up there with them. It was at Cannes the same time Pulp Fiction was. And Clerks just kind of really exploded, despite the fact that it's a black and white movie about two dudes basically just having a conversation about Star Wars or sex or customers, whatever it may be. But the fact that his writing is so clever and so intoxicating and so hilarious, a movie like that was able to gain the popularity that it did. I think there was a point in time where it was like the most stolen movie out of video stores or something. It like set a record of some kind.
I remember hearing that, yeah.
And then he was able to carry that on. What's your opinion on kind of the overall Theos universe?
Essentially what you said. I mean, it's varied, that's for sure. With only the characters connecting them, like none of the stories really play in all that much. Like Dogma almost feels like out of canon almost.
Yeah.
Because it's not really referenced in the others. Like well, Jay and Bob, like I think it's Clerks 2, Jay's religious.
Yeah, there's the movies connection.
Yeah.
I think, is Dogma the first appearance of movies? I think it might be.
Yeah, I believe so.
And then there is there's the quick moment in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back when he's talking about Moore's Day and the Time, and he says the song is written by God herself.
Yeah. That's true.
And then there's the post-credits scene with Alanis Morissette closing the book on the Askewniverse and dancing away. And then, did you not know that existed?
No.
Yeah.
What's that at the end of?
Strike Back.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it was before Clerks 2 was ever on idea, so it was her like closing the Askewniverse before he realized he was going to open it back up.
Oh, huh. I didn't know that. I'll have to seek that out.
So yeah, and like I said, we're jumping around in genres too, because here you've got like the ultimate indie movie. Then Mallrats, a lot of people consider Mallrats kind of a dip in quality because they were expecting something Clerks level, and they got something significantly more lowbrow, but still kind of in the same vein of them talking about, you know, comic books and movies and all that. And then Chasing Amy, while funny, is easily the closest thing he's gone to full-on drama, like completely.
Yeah.
Like Chasing Amy got like awards nominations and some wins. Like Jason Lee won the Spirit Award for supporting actor. And Jerry Lauren Adams got a Globe nomination. And Chasing Amy's the thing that Affleck was always kind of trying to get back to, where it was like shortly before he wrote Good Will Hunting, he was saying, like, you know, he was telling Kevin Smith, you need to write another movie, you need to write something the level of Chasing Amy again. That's what you need to do to reinvigorate, you know, how good you really can be. And then the way Kevin Smith, they were around the same time, so I'm not sure if this is completely what happened or just Kevin Smith making a good story out of it, but it was like, the result of that was Affleck saying, I'm going to write my own thing, and he wrote Good Will Hunting and won an Oscar. And we've seen where he is now. So, yeah, and then obviously, like I said, Dogma just really goes on. Dogma is my favorite movie in the Askewniverse. Do you have a particular one?
I'd probably say that one.
Yeah, because it's just so...
Batshit insane.
Yeah, there's hardly another movie like it. Like, it's really hard to compare it to something.
It's almost like all the other movies feel connected. Dogma feels like Jay and Bob just like dimension jumped into another movie that they didn't belong in.
Yeah, and the thing I was talking about, this is how I was going to bring up Yoga.
It feels like there's another movie going on around them.
Yeah. Which pretty much is the case. And the thing also is, when Yoga Hosers came out, Yoga Hosers is a movie that you apparently aren't aware of. It stars Johnny Depp's daughter and Kevin Smith's daughter, and they're Canadian clerks, go figure. And their characters are introduced in Tusk. So it's like he wants to make a trilogy of these horror comedies set in Canada. So there are these Canadian girls who work at this store, and then there are Nazi bratwursts that come out of the ground that are called Bratzies. And it's basically like, he was trying to make something akin to like Puppet Master or he was trying to kind of go for Gremlins is what he was doing. But the movie kind of failed miserably. Like, it's not very funny. and it just feels really low budget despite how much he's really going for the batshit crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you watch Yoga Hosers and then you watch Dogma, it's like Dogma seems so polished and so high budget by comparison. It makes Dogma feel like a giant Hollywood movie by comparison. Because it still is like, I mean, when you look at it, you can still kind of see Kevin Smith's low budget in there. But when you get to like the climax and stuff like that, the movie feels huge by Kevin Smith standards.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that, and it kind of sucks that he can go from something like Dogma and then go on the totally crazy route again by trying to do something like Yoga Hosers, and it's just so far off the bullseye that Dogma hit that I'm wondering. I'm curious what he's going to do with the reboot to see if he can kind of get back the quality that he was, even though some people might see it as a bit of a crutch that he's making another full-on in-joke movie like Strike Back was. But I feel like if he can find that magic that he had here in this area, that he will be able to make Reboot something special if his heart's really, really, really in it. And I think it might be, if it's the way Hank passionately talks about it in those making-of vlogs. So we'll see what happens with that.
Well, it's kind of like, you know, I told you the other day that I watched his review of Endgame, and he kind of needs to treat it like Endgame was treated, where Endgame felt like a love letter to the entire process of the Avengers franchise, and I feel like Reboot should be something similar.
Yeah, when you listen to his reviews, you can tell he knows what makes a movie good. But it's like when he writes movies stoned, you can tell it's like it gets away from him. But yeah, because even Zack and Miri, I kind of thought was like, he could have made something, you know, like as I guess romantic but also comedic as he did with like Chasing Amy. But it just really didn't have that same hit to it. Because Chasing Amy gets really dramatic and really goes for like the full-on sort of romantic drama. And it's like crazy how much it works. And you can tell it's coming from like a really real place, which is something totally unexpected in this particular universe with the recurring characters of Jay and Silent Bob, among others. And the fact that their scene in it is so limited. But still really funny. Like Jay still gets to do. They do the reverse thing where Bob spends most of the time talking, and Jay is the silent one that just speaks occasionally. But it's still really funny, and their banter is still there, even despite the fact that Silent Bob basically goes full on drone. And it's basically, you can see Kevin Smith stops writing the movie and steps in front of the camera to just flat out speak it to us. But it's like you can actually feel it. It doesn't feel like he's indulging or anything or going in some direction he shouldn't, and it really doesn't take away from the movie, because that's the kind of thing where if you make a movie that goes as, you know, serious and dramatic as Chasing Amy ends up, it could have been a total dramatic shift. He had to be really careful how he put Jay and Silent Bob in it, and he pretty much hit the exact note he had to. So, and the fact that that's the follow up to Mallrats, it was sort of like kind of like a fuck you to his critics, where it's like he made Clerks and he won them all over, and then he made Mallrats and they're like, what the fuck, this isn't what we wanted, and he's like, well, okay, how about this right after Mallrats, and the critics just fawned all over it. And then he was able to kind of start meshing that with Clerks 2 found a nice balance between the funny and the raunchy, and then when it had to get serious about Dante and Randall's friendship and where it stood.
Is Clerks 2 people's opinions as divided as I think they are?
Yeah, because every now and then I hear about somebody that doesn't like it. And there was talk about, you know, a critic or two walked out of it when it first came out. But then you also heard about, like, it was one of those movies at Cannes that got like an 8-minute standing ovation or something. And a lot of people really took to it and really thought it captured the magic. But you got those detractors every now and then. But I think for the most part, at least from the people I hear from, I don't hear much negative things said about it. It's mostly, I think, seen as, at least from what I hear anyway.
I think a lot of people were just expecting an updated version of Clerks with more modern conversations, and Clerks 2 had more of a story to tell.
Yeah. And there was the whole, and how it really kind of goes into because Clerks does also kind of, they get serious, but it's not so much about their friendship. It's about how dead end their lives are and what they're going to do about it. Mm-hmm. And Clerks 2 goes that same direction, but it's about their friendship, and it gets kind of even more deep than Clerks did in that regard.
And Clerks 2 kind of has the payoff from that the whole way through.
Yeah, especially with it spends throughout Clerks 2, we're more and more humanizing Randall, starting with the go-kart thing, when Jason Lee shows up. And it's like they're able to fit in character development and the gross-out comedy, because you've got the scene with the piss and flies, but then the transition to that is the go-kart scene with Randall, and that's when we realize we're going to start seeing more to Randall than we might have otherwise. Because for a while we kind of think that's just kind of a one-off thing, but then as the movie goes on we realize what Randall's got going on more. And it's less like he's trying to basically sabotage Dante's life for the sake of it. But he's trying to look out for him.
Plus, I think Clerks 2 is kind of fun because you get to watch Randall bounce off someone else.
Elias?
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's one of those cases where you would think it would take away from it, because you've got it in color now, and you're adding other characters, you're giving Dante another love triangle, yet somehow these things fit, and they work. And you bring in the people that kind of bring things down a little bit. Like, I guess it's the combination of it in the first movie, because you've kind of got Caitlin coming in that kind of is part of the love triangle, but also is like what Dante sees as what could have been, basically. And you kind of see that with some of the people they interact with in Clerks 2, like the way Jason Lee taunts them and all that. The Jason Lee scene kind of feels similar to when they run into Rick Darris in Clerks. Just his casual delivery of, yeah, I used to fuck her and all that.
So hygienic.
Yeah. Affleck. As of now, Affleck was doing an interview for Triple Frontier and said so far he hadn't been asked about reboot. But it sounded like if he is asked, he is open to it.
I feel like you kind of can't do it without him. I feel like he's a necessary piece.
Yeah, the only thing, it's like Samuel L. Jackson in the Tarantino universe. The only thing he's missing is the only thing he's missing from is the first movie. And so
he even has a small part in Kill Bill.
Yeah, and I love that you can throw Death Proof in there, but you get the point. And there's even the thing where it's even like a running joke between him and Smith. Even regardless of how big he's gotten, he still comes back for these somehow. And like we were talking about with Strike Back, he came back twice, and one of which was to play himself and make fun of himself. One of my favorite lines in the franchise, I think, is when they're running through, security runs through, and they're saying, are we having a problem with Affleck again? And Affleck just says, bullshit, I wasn't with a hooker today, ha ha. And he and Damon like making fun of each other's movies. And that's not even to mention the whole Good Will Hunting sequel thing, where they brought back the guy from the scene in Good Will Hunting to do that scene.
I don't like that apples, Will. What are we gonna do?
And it turns into like not just an in-joke for the View Askewniverse movies, but just Hollywood in general. All the it's interesting to look at now, but all the jokes at Miramax's expense throughout the movie as well are interesting now. And then
Jason Biggs, like we talked about earlier, it's the pie fucker.
Then there is the stuff that's just some lines that stand out just because. One thing, like, one time, I don't know why I was thinking of it, but I looked it up and I discovered something. It is just so good by itself. Tracy Morgan screaming, "Give me the map, Scott," is its own YouTube clip. It's always fun to kind of feel those isolated lines and then come to learn that you're apparently not alone because they have their own YouTube clip, just those lines, with no context.
We've come across a couple of those in discussions.
Yeah, and it's also cool to see all the returning actors, because when they did Favreau's show Dinner for Five on IFC a while back, they talked about a semi-rivalry that they kind of had, because I think around the time these four had come out, Jon Favreau made like a public comment about how he thought, like, he didn't like the idea that Kevin Smith used the same actors. Despite how much Favreau's worked with Vince Vaughn. But Kevin Smith kind of went into it and basically...
And Favreau is a part of the MCU.
Yeah. This probably would have been 4 years or so prior to that existing, this interview, or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, basically he went into and described how it's, I can't remember exactly what he said, but it basically, you go into them and it basically just kind of feels almost like a family of sorts when you see the returning faces, even if they're in different roles and all that. And just kind of makes the universe feel complete, even though it's a universe of people that look a lot like other characters in it. It's kind of like how in Mallrats, when T.S., who is Brody's best friend, is dating Brandy Svenning, Clark Trelawney's character. But then when they're talking about their sex horror stories and Chasing Amy, Banky, who's played by Jason Lee, talks about having dated Brandy Svenning. And the reason he can't move his neck a certain way is because the Michael Rooker character from Mallrats walked in on this happening. So the way they all fit together like that, and all the... And I'm wondering how it was at the time, because it's something you really didn't see a lot. Maybe outside of the original Universal Monster movies. When you watch Clerks and you hear about Julie Dwyer dying in the pool, and the fact that that's one of the first things mentioned in Mallrats about why they can't leave like they were going to. And it's like, you see the stories interconnecting so quickly. And the fact that Willem, the homeless guy that Scott Mosier plays in Clerks, I believe is supposed to be the same character that Ethan Suplee is in Mallrats. Despite the fact that he's at the end of Strike Back outside the theater and he's Mosier again, saying, "That's beautiful, man." So there's some confusion there, but I think that's actually even been explained away by Kevin Smith at one point. So is there an individual movie you want to talk about specifically, or... We kind of went into Dogma, more or less. I do remember it was interesting that Affleck plays the villain in Dogma. Because he was seen as like... I mean, yeah, he's the villain in Mallrats.
I was going to say Shannon Hamilton.
Not to the degree that Bartleby is, let's be real. And the thing about that was that he was talking to Kevin Smith, and he was on a plane to do something, and he just wanted reading material. Like, he wasn't reading for a part or anything, so the reading material that Kevin Smith gave him was Dogma. And like, while he was on the plane, he called Kevin Smith and was like, "Dude, can I play Bartleby?"
Dogma just sticks out too because it's like, it's got the widest range of what the fuck cast too. Like, Chris Rock, Alan Rickman. How did Alan Rickman get involved?
There's like a whole story on that, and then there's the whole story about how... I
love the story that one of Alan Rickman's demands to do it was he wanted to stick to the script.
And then Jason Mewes had to like memorize the whole thing.
Yeah.
And he didn't even tell Kevin Smith he was going to do that. He was just like, I just don't want to piss off Alan Rickman. Yeah, a lot of these have like books inside them that have anecdotes. One of my favorites is this Criterion of Chasing Amy, which this Criterion of Chasing Amy may be the only way Chasing Amy exists on DVD. I've only ever seen it in its Criterion form. But it's got a map of all of like the VS Universe characters in it. Like the ones we've met and how they line up, and even like who graduated from which high school.
That's
and
neat.
It's like all mapped out.
Huh. Didn't know that.
And all the people that have like recurring storylines.
Yeah.
Where certain characters grew up. The dogs we've only thus heard about. Walt Flanagan's dog. So yeah, all the in-jokes like that work. The You Tell Him Steve Dave guy, the fanboy guy. Those characters too, like Brian Johnson and Walt Flanagan, those guys that you just see all around the franchise, that only if you like really know the franchise you recognize those guys and know their names. Sometimes their names are just brought up, like Walt Flanagan's dog, or the guy's name was Brian Johnson in Dogma that Bethany let piss in her hands, remember? So it's, and I wonder how much of this he like when he goes into a script, how much he plans on using, or when he was doing this universe anyway, how much he planned on using other parts of the universe or other references, or if they just kind of happen naturally.
It does make you wonder.
Would you say, do you agree though with most people that just kind of by default really Mallrats might be the weak link? If you had to pick one.
Yeah, but but I still find a lot of enjoyable stuff in it.
Yeah. I'd say the only other one that's kind of susceptible to that might be Strike Back. It's just because it's like all an in-joke, like the whole thing.
Yeah.
We do have new characters like
I don't think Strike Back is meant to be a good movie. I think it was just meant to like reward everybody.
Yeah.
A fan service movie.
Yeah, and it worked so well. Remember the whole thing about this was back before trailers were online, so people bought tickets to Scary Movie 2 just to see Strike Back's trailer, and then they'd leave. Like they paid the full price just to see a trailer.
Well, I think it was in Kevin Smith's review of Endgame that he did. I think he mentioned in it because he was talking about how Endgame was so good at fan service, and he mentioned that Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back was a fan service movie.
Yeah.
And he thought that he had done it the best at that point, but Endgame bested him or something like that. But
he's kind of hoping to recapture it with the reboot he's doing now. So we'll see, which has Chris Hemsworth in it.
Yeah. Which is also kind of weird that it's called a reboot.
Yeah.
Like.
Well, it might also be him like kind of doing like a satire on the whole reboot culture too. Kind of like what Scream 4 was.
Maybe.
Which makes sense because they were in Scream 3 too.
Yeah. Because we actually had the debate. I asked if we should include Scream 3 in this video.
Yeah, because it was like a back and forth thing because on the VCR in Stu's house in the first Scream, you can see the VHS of Clerks. And then the replay of that was Jay and Silent Bob were in Scream 3. Thus making, I guess, Scream 3 canon in this. So somewhere, while all these shenanigans are going on one side you've got Scott Foley actually killing people, but then again, all those people in the surprisingly realistic Scream 3 universe, apart from the whole potentially superhuman Scott Foley thing, Dogma is apparently sharing a universe. So, Dogma just throws everything up in the air.
It's definitely the odd one.
But in, like, it's weird that it's the odd one out, but it's, like, the best one, too.
It's the first, I think, if I remember right, it's the first time he uses Carlin.
Yeah. And then there's the whole thing of how he because of like his actual knowledge of Catholicism is where it comes from, and it's like so in a way it came from the heart, but then there was the whole thing where the churches like protested the movie, and then he showed up and pretended to be one of the protesters and actually ended up on the news protesting his own movie. There's actually, I believe the news footage is on YouTube somewhere, and he goes into full detail on it, I think in one of his Evening With specials. So, yeah, is there anything, what about Clerks? The first Clerks really stands out to you?
Just its vibe, honestly. It's just two guys chilling, having conversations about nerdy shit.
You can tell it's in the Linklater era. Like, it's right in there with, like, Dazed and Confused and Slacker and all those, and it just goes right in. Like, you would almost think it might have been one of Linklater's movies at the time, especially with the constant soundtrack.
It's also funny that the original ending might have killed the idea of a universe.
Yeah, I'm so glad he didn't stick with that, because that ending is so dark. Like, even though I know it's not the real ending, I watched the alternate ending, and I got, like, depressed.
Yeah, it's a very dark ending.
It's especially dark when you think about Clerks 2. It's like, that guy could just not be alive.
Yeah.
What do you think about Clerks 2 having a dance scene in it? Does that stick out in and all? I know, once again, this is the universe that has Dogma in it.
Yeah, I think...
But is it weird that only one of these movies, I think, has, like, a show-stopping number in it? Because there was a movie I was
You could count Salma Hayek and Dogma.
Could you, though?
I don't know. 1999 Salma Hayek could stop any show she wanted
to. That scene seemed more focused on Jay and Dwight Yule doing their thing. Isn't it funny to see Dwight Yule playing a character that's watching Salma Hayek dance and paying her all that money when he was Hooper in Chasing Amy, like one of the gayest characters in like the 90s. And I heard somewhere, I was thinking obviously them comparing scars and Chasing Amy, like sex scars is reference to Jaws.
Yeah.
I think I was reading somewhere that was supposed to be a scene in Mallrats. It was supposed to be between two different characters in another movie, I think.
You can also tell in some of these movies, like some of the send-ups, like how much Kevin Smith just loves movies.
Yeah, I love
especially like Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. One of the biggest in jokes is that Mark Hamill's in it and plays like a villain named Cockknocker.
I love how clearly game Mark Hamill was for that too.
Yeah.
He was so ready to play Cockknocker. And then there was the whole thing of I love the joke in Dogma that still works, even though it didn't work in the way it was supposed to. How God was supposed to be played by Holly Hunter, and Jay's line is, "What the fuck is this? The piano?" But even though it's not Holly Hunter, the joke still works because Holly Hunter, the piano, is mute, and God doesn't talk. So the joke still works even without Holly Hunter. So, and it's like, and it's another thing like that too, where it's like sometimes it might seem like a crutch to reference, like spoof movies do this a lot, and movies like one of my go-to complaints is when Ted completely recreates John Candy's mess around scene in Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and it's like, what is the point of that? Like, what is the joke except that he's doing what the movie did? There's no punchline because they just don't change it. So it's like, you have to be really talented to make movies that are pretty much all about people referencing other things. And Clerks and Mallrats, for the most part, pull that off.
I think it's funny, too, how in a lot of these movies there's so many actors in bit parts. Like, the one I just thought of was Judd Nelson in Strike Back.
Yeah. I love watching his... there's a special feature where the full reel is all of the alternate takes he did. After he says, "Let's go back to the station house," and there was always a new line. And Matt Damon just sitting around and chasing Amy.
Yeah.
With Brian O'Halloran. Brian O'Halloran and Matt Damon are in a room together and chasing Amy, and Brian O'Halloran is the one that gets the most lines.
Yeah. And I love how in Mallrats, Brian O'Halloran, like, he's related to the character in Clerks, if I remember right.
Yeah, because
he's Gil Hicks.
And then he's Grant Hicks in Dogma.
Yeah.
Regardless, there is a Hicks played by Brian O'Halloran that is ill-fated. And it's... and then there was, what else? Oh, and the fact that you could tell he was, like, growing, because I talk about how he was able to make movies about movies that... characters that just reference other movies, and still make a successful script out of it, because the writing is so clever. And, like, the way... Like, it's one thing that you could say they're using Star Wars as a crutch because the characters just talk about Star Wars. But the fact that they make these whole conversations about it, like the independent contractors, is such a clever piece of dialogue. I love the writing in that scene. And the fact that he can do that and go above and beyond. But then you could tell that he, like, kind of... The more the series went on, the more he got away from that, because Chasing Amy became entirely his own thing, Dogma became entirely his own thing, and so you really kind of saw him grow into it. In Clerks, you had the discussions, but they weren't like that. Like, their Lord of the Rings discussion, like, there wasn't really an in-depth discussion, it was just Randall pissing off the superfan to where he got so mad he threw up. And then you actually have where that scene is like so successful in making its point, is that oftentimes if there's somebody that doesn't like the Lord of the Rings trilogy, or does and just wants to, you know, have a laugh about it, they're going to reference that scene. Like, it's not just like if these were lesser movies and the writing wasn't up to par, you would say, oh, Clerks is just using Star Wars, or Clerks 2 is just using Lord of the Rings. But the fact that you can watch Clerks and Clerks 2 and think of those movies, but also when you watch Star Wars or Lord of the Rings, you can think back to the conversations in Clerks. It's not just you, it's not those movies are necessarily too big for the conversations of these characters. They actually stand on their own. I think in Clerks 2 also, like, the Lord of the Rings discussion where Randall gets upset and he's like, there's only one trilogy. It's a way to show that, like, he's aging. He's aging out of these conversations. And then there's almost a time, the Oscar getting brought up almost makes him give up. When he says Peter Jackson won Best Director, something George Lucas has never and will never do. You can almost see, like, defeat in Randall. I think he, like, storms off. But then it gets to the end of Return of the King when he realizes the kryptonite he's found against this guy. I believe what makes him puke is he talks about, like, the look they give each other. and what his alternate ending would
right,
be.
right before Sam bricks. The guy's response before he throws up is just, "Fuck you."
Because it's basically like he brought a conversation you'd find like trolls having on a message board and made actual people have it.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes he does make those juvenile jabs, like how he and Paul Thomas Anderson kind of got into it over Magnolia,
Mm-hmm.
where he said something really derogatory about Magnolia. I don't remember if Paul Thomas Anderson responded or not, but Kevin Smith like famously hated Magnolia and said it was like really bloated and self-righteous and stuff like that. Hence the joke that just flies by in an instant, and Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back, when Holden's reading the messages from people that hate Jay and Silent Bob, and he says, "Who the fuck said that?" And he's like, "I don't know, some guy named Magnolia fan." And then the joke just goes by. It's like that kind of shit you just have to really look for. It's like I said, it's amazing to me we came out of Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back not wondering what the hell we just saw. Like, I can't even imagine how that happened. Because, seriously, without these movies, none of Strike Back makes sense.
Do you think it's interesting? You brought up the dance number in Clerks 2. What do you think of the fact that this is where we started, and Clerks 2 ends with essentially a donkey show?
I thought you were going to get all... It goes full circle because of that really nice shot where it fades back into black and white and we see Kevin Smith's mom pulling the milk out, the milkmaid. And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot the donkey show. It's like...
It is pretty neat because Clerks 2 also starts in black and white until Dante realizes the building's on fire.
Yeah, that's a really good shot too, where it's the actual fire. So, you can see like there's like a whole hour and a half making of thing on Clerks 2. You'd be surprised how intriguing the making of a movie like Clerks 2 is. Like, I was like, I'll watch this, 90-minute documentary on how it was made. I'll just start it and see how it looks, and you just watch the whole thing.
It's funny how so far it's been the only direct sequel. Like, in name.
Yeah.
Excuse me, in name. Because, like, look how far we went through between two movies that one's a sequel for the other, but these are all tied in.
Yeah, because there was gonna be...
It is a lot like Avengers, Winter Soldier, Civil War, Ragnarok, Dark World, Age of Ultron, or like Infinity War. Like, it's the direct sequel, you get some things in between. So it's funny that he's such a fan of the MCU and his universe is very similar.
Yeah. Especially since not only do they both have Stan Lee in them, they both have a Loki in them too.
Yeah.
And the whole thing of Matt Damon playing Loki and Ragnarok.
And sad face, Stan Lee didn't live long enough to see both of them come to an ending.
Yeah, though obviously there is the Captain Marvel cameo, where because it's set in '94, he's reading the script for Mallrats. It was a really nice touch.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's funny. I'm sure Kevin Smith loved that.
Yeah, like the first thing I did was search, what does Kevin Smith think of the cameo in Captain Marvel? Apparently Kevin Feige called him and told him in advance that's what they were going to be doing, and then when he saw the movie, he got to like wait for it.
Oh, I bet he was thrilled.
Yeah.
Because he's such a nerd.
And he kind of considered it like, basically like a payback for Stan Lee being in Mallrats. And it was like he kind of got to be referenced in the MCU, and like that was enough for him.
It shocked me that Stan Lee never came back.
Yeah, it seems like he would have had to have come back and strike back.
Yeah.
I'm actually had to stop and think. No, I'm pretty sure he doesn't.
No, Mallrats is it. I mean, his scene in Mallrats is great.
You were talking about direct sequels also. Obviously, he's been building up Clerks 3 for a long time, like saying it's on and off and on and off. I don't know if reboot is just going to be that now, if Clerks 3 is still going to... Because I think he had another falling... The problem is always he has a falling out with Jeff Anderson. And like can't convince him to do it. And I think that's what stopped Clerks 3.
What's interesting to me is, and this is no offense to him, but what else is Jeff Anderson doing?
I think I saw some stuff he was doing on YouTube. I can't remember exactly what it was, but there's like, I think it's just, I'm really not quite sure what it is. I don't know if it's just like he just doesn't have interest, or I'm really not sure exactly.
I mean, maybe he is tired of playing the character. That happens.
Yeah, because I know, as far as Clerks 2 goes, I think he had to reconcile with him about something, and there was the whole thing of Clerks 2 being Jason Mewes' reward for getting clean. But then there was going to be the Mallrats sequel. Remember, there were those Twitter pictures where he gathered up the cast again. He got like Michael Rooker and Shannon Doherty and Jason Lee and everybody.
I would love to see Michael Rooker come back.
The guy that plays the Fours, he had a picture with. And it was going to be, and it turned into, it was going to be like a series, and it was going to be called Mallbrats. But then I haven't heard anything about that in a real long time. I don't know if he dropped it or what, or if it was. Obviously, Shannon Doherty's life got pretty complicated there for a while with her cancer stuff. I don't know if that had something to do with that too, but so yeah, so it will be interesting to see, because he keeps coming back to this. But that's the thing, is usually when directors come back to the stuff they used to do, it's kind of like, oh, I guess they've run out of ideas, or oh, I guess they don't have any other original ideas. But it's like, this is the kind of thing where the fact that he was able to make Clerks 2 as well as he did, when that seemed like we're not sure if it's a good idea or not, especially with a different setting and more characters and in color and all that, and not exactly the same style, and he was still able to make it work as well as he does, and the fact that his other movies haven't quite... I do find his career extremely interesting. Like, it's interesting to me that Yoga Hosers exists, strictly because he's doing whatever the hell he wants. I think that should be encouraged, even if the movies aren't good, because it's interesting, and it's him trying something else. But at the same time, I still really want him to... I want to hear more updates on Moose Jaws. Because his Canada trilogy, which is like horror-based, is you know what Tusk is, the one with Justin Long where he turns him into a walrus. Then the second one is Yoga Hosers. The third one's supposed to be a movie called Moose Jaws, which is literally Jaws with a moose. So with
all the Jaws references, it makes sense that he's going that route with the movie.
And he's not even hiding it in the title. But in this case, even though I do think that I like the idea that he's getting to do what he wants, unlike a lot of people, there is a certain excitement to thinking of him coming back to these characters, because it feels like they're so ingrained in him. You kind of trust that he'll be able to, once he's in the back of the minds of those characters, that some good stuff will come out of him again. Especially since he keeps talking about it, almost like he's been thinking it up for a while. Like, it's had time to, like, if he's got a bad idea, he's had time to realize it's a bad idea and scrap it. But I guess we'll see. It'll be, Reboot will be the first, I think, Jay and Silent Bob movie since Zack and Miri, which a lot of people consider the turn down another path. So obviously we didn't say much about Cop Out, because that was just kind of him working for Warner Brothers. So he didn't really... I mean, he says that he really did everything he could for that movie, and I believe it. But when you're working with a studio, it's...
There's some issues with Bruce Willis, too.
He's got a lot of Bruce Willis stories, and many of them aren't positive. Some of them are. If you look up the story about how he convinced Bruce Willis to do his character from Moonlighting for one take of Cop Out, it's actually like a really nice story. But yeah, so like when he's not under the constraints of a demanding actor or a demanding studio or a script that isn't his, or the constraints of like not going as far with some of the humor or whatever. So yeah, like the fact that the movie was supposed to be called A Couple of Dicks and they wouldn't let him call it that. So so yeah, is that pretty much how we feel about this franchise as a whole?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Probably down the road I'll get more into them, like, individually. Like, I've already done that for Clerks. But as far as just the franchise as a whole, this is pretty much how I feel about this. Like I said, with absolutely no preparation whatsoever. There was this was like an on-the-spot at the very last second video that we did not prepare for whatsoever. So, yeah, there that is. So, whatever we're going to do next, as we talked about yet again, going to probably look into that John Hughes thing somewhere in the next month or two, and then whatever else comes up. I do want to get you to see Inherent Vice soon, so that we can do a Lebowski versus Inherent Vice video. And I'm just really curious how you feel about Inherent Vice, especially with Lebowski being one of your favorite movies.
Mm-hmm.
So that'll be fun as well, and I'm sure we'll think up some other stuff as well.
Yeah.
So
there's that Office video I want to do eventually.
Yeah, The Office as well.
Mm-hmm.
So unless you have anything else to say, I think, is that about it?
That's it.
Alright, then that's it for this.